I gave up texting for a whole month, and believe it or not, it was not to make this video. So many challenge videos on YouTube, I think people start the challenges because they plan to make a video out of them. This was something I did because I just couldn't stand to text any longer. You see, I've given up pretty much all of my social media on my phone. It was too much of a time suck, and I was tired of living my life looking at a screen. So one by one, I deleted social media apps. It didn't happen all at once. It was a very gradual process. And maybe eventually I'll make a video all about how I did that. But the one thing that was still causing me to check my phone compulsively was texting. Now you might think, how much time could texting really take? But according to my iPhone, I pick up my phone and look at my text messages hundreds of times a day. And I could tell that I was getting a lot of anxiety around texting. I don't think I ever would have noticed it had I not deleted the social media, because deleting the social media caused me to want to leave my phone lying around. But then I wouldn't answer texts for hours, and I'd have people texting me, asking me, "Are you okay? Are you mad at me? Did you get my text?" Those things stressed me out. I'm sure you know what this is like too. We have all been there where someone sends us a text and we're kind of busy, we read it, but then we don't have time to reply, or we mentally reply. And 3 days later, we're like, oh darn it, I didn't answer them, and I hope they're not mad at me. I hope they don't think I'm rude. And I was just tired of living in that space every day. I was tired of constantly having this mental to-do list of all these people I needed to text back. This problem got so bad that I started considering getting a dumb phone where you have to hit each button like 3 times to get a letter out, just so that I'd have an excuse for not texting more. I thought, well, maybe people know that I have a dumb phone, they won't text me as much because they'll know how time consuming it is for me to text back, and they'll be more understanding. That's wild, because there are some other reasons I've considered getting a dumb phone, but if that is my main reason for making such a huge change in my life, that's absurd. I figured there had to be a better way, and so I decided to just let everybody know what I was doing. But this was scary. I needed a way to be able to tell people I was doing this so that they wouldn't be more offended that I didn't answer them for a month, when previously my anxiety was that I didn't answer them for an hour. I thought an automatic response would be perfect, but it turns out that with an iPhone, you actually can't just automatically send a response unless you're in driving mode. Even in do not disturb mode, there's no way to automatically send a text when somebody else texts you. So I thought, okay, I'll just keep my phone in driving mode for the whole month of the challenge. And I wrote up this text so that I would have this neat little response to anybody who texted me, and they would know what was going on and know that it was fine to call me. Of course, it's fine to call me anytime, but for some reason, our society has completely forgotten about phone calls. Problem was, after the challenge began, I realized that after driving somewhere, the driving mode would automatically turn off. So it stopped sending that automatic response. So I pivoted a bit and I texted like the top 10 or 15 people, friends and contacts, and let them know what I was doing. I gave them the date range, told them a little bit about why I was doing this challenge, and invited them to call me instead anytime. Immediately that night, as soon as I sent out that text to people, I started getting phone calls. People were a little panicked. They were like, "What's wrong? What's going on? Are you upset with me?" People were taking it surprisingly personally, even though I thought I made it sound really generic. And they were just kind of like worried about me, which is another thing that's kind of bizarre to me. Like, is texting so crucial, so mainstream now that people are going to be genuinely concerned about your well-being if you want to stop for a month? I get it. Like, I get that it's a pretty common way of communicating, but still you would think that taking on a challenge like that wouldn't be so foreign and taboo. But I reassured them, and then they seemed to understand what was going on, and they chilled out a little bit. But I still had a lot of concerns. I was worried that I was hurting people's feelings more by doing this, and I was also afraid of missing out on things. I get a lot of mass group texts with dancing and other hobbies I like to do, and I'm afraid that people aren't gonna think to text me individually, that maybe they'll throw me into the group text, or maybe they just leave me out of the group text because they know I'm not texting, but not get around to actually letting me know individually. And of course, the inconvenience factor, which was actually bigger than I expected. This was probably the least of my concerns, but ended up being a really big one. There were so many times I want to send just a quick little text instead of a phone call, and I did end up making some exceptions, but it was pretty rare. The funniest thing was that my mom called me right after, and she didn't even call me. I forgot. She texted me. As soon as I sent this text to my mom, she texted me and she just says, "I don't count, right?" I'm like, yeah, I guess not. Not knowing me, it probably sounds like my mother does not respect my boundaries at all. But honestly, I didn't mind her being an exception because I don't feel any pressure to respond to her with text messages, because she's not like that. She's one of the most chill people in my life, so I did not feel like that she was disrespecting my boundaries, and I hardly text her anyways. So that first evening, after letting people know and handling the phone calls, I was feeling so excited about this challenge. It felt like it was gonna go great, and then not 24 hours into it, I started running into some real problems. One of them was that I didn't realize how often, or maybe coincidentally, people that I haven't talked to in like up to a year. Some people that I haven't talked to in up to a year started texting me being like, hey, thinking about you. It's been so long. And I'm like, oh no. It's weird to send them this text, this robotic sounding text telling them that I'm not texting for a month. And sometimes they were sending them in inconvenient times where I didn't really want to call. So I did cave a little bit. I answered some of these people that I hadn't talked to in a really long time instead of sending them that really generic text, especially because of the auto response thing. If the auto response had worked, I think it would have felt a little bit better. Like, okay, well, they're not going to take it personally. They're just going to see I'm doing this challenge. But so often I'd see these texts like 3 hours after they sent them. So it would seem totally fake to send this canned response 3 hours after they text. And part of the response was saying I wasn't going to be reading text, but obviously I read their text if I sent that out 3 hours later. You know what I mean? I had one friend that offered to fly out and see me, and I'm just not going to ignore that. And I could have called. I guess I'm making excuses. I should have called, but there was a learning curve, a growing curve the first week or so of this challenge when I did make more exceptions than I should have. But because of all these initial texts, most of it took care of itself. Most people respected the challenge. And it was really interesting to see who respected the challenge and some people didn't respect it so much. So I expected that some people might forget that I was doing the challenge, but what surprised me was people that would text me and say, hey, I know you're doing the challenge, but just sending a quick text. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. In the moment, I always felt like it was warranted. Like, okay, yeah, I understand why you have to send this quick text. It's not a big deal. But in hindsight, it does feel kind of surprising that they couldn't do it. And I honestly don't feel mad about it, but I don't feel guilty about it either. And that's the difference, where before, those types of people that expect immediate responses, I would feel guilty and anxious for not giving them a quick response. And I would send apology texts like, I'm sorry I haven't responded, I'm sorry I didn't have my phone on me. Whereas after I set this boundary and they were kind of ignoring it, I wasn't upset with them because I understood that it was a convenience thing, but I also didn't feel at all guilty for not checking my phone for hours on end. And that was the most fun part. I really enjoyed just putting my phone in a box and walking away from it for hours or even half the day and just not thinking about my phone. I think the most frustrating thing though in the moment was trying to decide if I should answer these people that are saying, hey, I'm sorry for texting, just a quick thing. It felt petty to not answer, but kind of like I was breaking my challenge to answer them. Most of the time I would end up giving them a quick response, but if they kept texting me, I just started ignoring the text entirely. And then there are some friends that just went above and beyond. My friend Michelle in particular was amazing. I was at work and it was lunchtime and she calls me and asks for my email address. So I give her my email address and she sends me a picture of a purse that she's getting rid of, a really beautiful leather bag, and asked if I wanted it, which is obviously something she would have texted me before, but she was being so respectful of my challenge. It meant a lot. And I certainly don't expect anybody to do that for a challenge like this because I know a lot of it is my thing and I don't expect other people to change their lifestyles because of a weird challenge that I'm doing, but it meant a lot. And I feel like that's what was so interesting about this challenge is I went from all this anxiety of people pleasing and trying to change myself for other people to just seeing how far my friends are willing to go for me or the opposite, in which case, like I said, I'm not mad, but I'm not going to be overly concerned about going out of my way for them. Another thing that I learned was challenges don't have to be all or nothing to be extremely effective. I did make some exceptions. There is a benefit to doing challenges, even most of the way. The point is that you challenge yourself, that you stretch yourself to some level. This was so hard the first week, but the crazy thing was, after the challenge was over, I didn't notice. It took me like 3 days, and then I was like, what day did I say I was gonna stop doing this? And I had to go back through my text to see the text that I sent people telling them about the challenge and to realize that the challenge had been over for like 3 days. And by that point, people had pretty much stopped texting me. I didn't get this flood of texts after the challenge ended. It was just a trickle here and there or people still apologizing for texting, maybe because they didn't realize the challenge was over. So that was really to me that by the end of it, it was so easy that I wasn't even counting down the days anymore. So many challenges are like this, where in the beginning, it feels so hard and you think, how am I possibly going to make it to the end of this? But then by the end, it's a new way of your life and it's a lot easier to sustain. So am I going to continue not texting? Not entirely, but I do think I want to be way closer to this side of the spectrum than I was before. I want people in my life to know that if they really need a response from me, they're gonna need to call me because I don't check my texts often and I don't enjoy having anxiety over when I'm gonna reply or which ones I forgot to reply to. I can't have that be part of my life. If you're thinking of doing something like this, I have a few suggestions for you, although I'm sure it's going to look very different for you because your life and your stresses and anxieties are so much different than mine. One thing I'm really glad I did, and I would suggest you do as well, is be super honest about the reasons you're doing the challenge. For me, the biggest reason was that it just stressed me out having to respond to texts. And it was a little bit awkward explaining this, especially to people that text me kind of often, but they seem to really understand. And I could have said other reasons. You know, I mean, I have this channel. I could have thought about, well, I'll make a video or use that as an excuse. I could have said that I'm just trying a fun challenge and not really given a reason, but I'm really glad that I was somewhat vulnerable about the reason because I feel like it made people respect it more. Another thing is probably don't be too strict about it. If you can get yourself to cut way back and make a couple exceptions, that's okay. I had a friend text me about something pretty bad, but I assumed she would be occupied, so I didn't want to call her in that moment. So I texted her back and forth. It was not a problem. At the end of the day, my friends are really important to me, and if something big is going on and it feels necessary to text them instead of call, I'm gonna do that. And I don't think you should feel bad if you decide that an exception is warranted. The last thing is to pivot however you need to. Be able to set up an auto response and have no trouble with that. You might decide not to do an auto response. You might decide to read texts but not answer them, or not read them at all, or read a couple if they seem like they're from people that you haven't talked to in a really long time or something urgent, but try not to read the majority of them. Whatever it looks like for you, it can be customized, and you can also pivot in the middle. But if you are pivoting, make sure it's for a really good reason, not just because you had a weak moment. I don't think I got so much more time out of this challenge. Like, with giving up social media, I save hours a day now because I'm not scrolling things like Instagram. Texting, I don't think was taking up that much of my time, especially not in one block. So it's not like I added a new hobby, but just the stress that has gone away of me being able to leave my phone somewhere and forget about it. For example, today I forgot my phone this morning when I went to work. Completely forgot it, realized on the way to work, thought about turning around and realized I don't need to. I don't need my phone. And I would have had time and I could have still been to work on time if I had turned around. And in the past, I think I would have turned around, but I just don't need it. And I forgot it because I hadn't checked my phone this morning. I hadn't looked at it at all this morning, except for waking up with my wake up buddy, which is a whole nother can of worms that I'll make a video about. But I just don't look at it very often, so I leave it places more and it's fine. And I don't feel like I have to constantly know where my phone is and check my phone and get back to people, and that feels so good. If that isn't an issue for you with texting, it might be better to give up something else on your phone that's kind of taking away more from your life than texting is. Leave that up to you. Hope you enjoyed, and leave any questions you have in the comments and I will definitely get back to you. See you next time.